We start. Hare Krishna and welcome to this new episode of Bhagavatam for the independently thoughtful. So we are in the second chapter of the seventh canto. We continue from text number 39. And Yamaraja is instructing the bereaved relatives, especially wives, of King Suyajna, king of a province called Ushinara. And he died in the battle. And Yamaraja is telling them about the nature of the soul, eternal and deathless. And this is a story that Hiranyakashipu is telling his relatives who were grieving for the death of Hiranyaksha at the hands of Lord Varaha.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnanjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilatam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharan Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarani Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gauravakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Seven canto, second chapter, text 39. Icha yesha shijati dham avyayo ya eva raksha pate chaya tasya vala kridanama ishitus characharam nigraha sangrahe prabhu.
The boy addressed the women. O weak women, only by the will of the Supreme Lord, only by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is never diminished, is the entire world created, maintained, and again annihilated. This is the verdict of the Vedic knowledge. This material creation, consisting of the moving and non-moving, is exactly like his plaything. Being the Supreme Lord, he is completely competent to destroy and protect. In this regard, the queens might argue. If a husband was protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead when in the womb, why has he not been given protection now? To this question, the answer is Ya Ichchesha Shrijatidam Avyayo Yaeva Rakshati Avalumpate Chayaha. One cannot argue with the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is always free, and therefore He can protect and can also annihilate. He is not our order carrier. Whatever He likes, He will do. Therefore, He is the Supreme Lord, the Lord who does not create this material world at anyone's request. Therefore, He can annihilate everything merely by His will. This is His supremacy. If one argues, why does He act in this way? The answer is that He can do so because He is supreme. No one can question His activities if one argues, what is the purpose of this sinful creation and annihilation? The answer is that to prove His omnipotence, He can do anything and no one can question Him. If He were answerable to us concerning why He does something and why He does not, His supremacy would be curtailed.
Yeah, sometimes people say, oh, there is so much suffering in the world, therefore there cannot be a God. Actually, the same argument can be used in the opposite way. Everybody wants to be happy, but everybody suffers. That means there must be a God, because this is the opposite of the desire of everyone. Everybody wants to be prosperous and happy, peaceful, and flourishing in many ways. So there must, but they're not. They all suffer in different ways, mentally, physically, and at the end, everybody dies. So there must be a superior being who creates this annihilation. Of course, this is not a very common argument we present, but it's a valid argument. It's a valid argument. So people can say why there is suffering. There is suffering because there is a higher being who imposes that suffering on sinful living beings. I mean, it's everybody in this cosmos. Anybody?
Patichutam tishtati dishtarakshitaam grihe sthitam tadvihatam minashyati jivatyanantopi tad ikshito vane grihe bhiguptasyato syahato na jivati. Sometimes one loses his money on a public street where everyone can see it, and yet his money is protected by destiny and not seen by others. That's so true. Thus, the man who lost it gets it back. On the other hand, if the Lord does not give protection, even money maintained very securely at home is lost. If the Supreme Lord gives one protection, even though one has no protector and is in the jungle, one remains alive, whereas a person well protected at home by relatives and others sometimes dies, no one being able to protect him. This is basically like that Mare Krishna Rakhi Krishna Mareke. And Krishna wants to kill somebody, or there's another Purandaradasa song. So the translation of that is, when Krishna wants to kill somebody, nobody can protect him. And if Krishna wants to protect somebody, nobody can kill him. So there's another Vaishnava Acharya song, which also says that Shri Patiya Kataksha Vikshana Tapuvaga Aneka Bandhugalu Laksha Vaidyarugalu Iralagi Kanna Kanna Biduvaro. Means if we don't have the grace of the Shripati, which is Krishna, upon a person, even if somebody has aneka bandhugalu, means limitless friends, laksha vaidyarugalu, means 1 lakh is called what? Laksha is lakh, right? Oh, lakh. 1 lakh, lakhs of doctors cannot save or cure an individual if it is Krishna's will for that person to suffer, or that it is the Krishna's will that person has to die. So that's but wait, I have a question. Maybe after the purport I'll ask it. I don't know why I can't. What is this? Purport. These are examples of the supremacy of the Lord. Our plans to protect or annihilate do not act, but whatever he thinks of doing actually happens. The examples given in this regard are practical. Everyone has had such practical experiences, and there are also many other clear examples. For instance, Prahlad Maharaj said that a child is certainly dependent on his father and mother, but in spite of their presence, the child is harassed in many ways. Sometimes, in spite of supply of good medicine and an experienced physician, a patient does not survive. Therefore, since everything is dependent on the free will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our only duty is to surrender unto him and seek his protection. So my question is, so this point, even the purport also comes here, about even when one has no protector and is in jungle, one remains alive, and when somebody's protected by relatives and others, still we may be killed, etc. So where do we know where to draw the line between when it is Krishna's will and when it's our own decisions and choices and patterns of choices and habits that is actually keeping us in whether it is misfortune or whether it's ill health?
Well, the point is that we need to do our dharma, our duty, And say, for instance, you're going in the night in a forest where there are ferocious beasts and poisonous snakes, that's like suicide. Here, the verse is simply emphasizing that even in extreme conditions, the Lord can protect. Even in extreme conditions of material protection, the Lord may decide, no, this person has to go, this person has to suffer, has to be killed. So, like for instance, here say one loses the money in the public street, still he finds it. But 99.99% of the time, if you're not careful enough and you don't keep the money safely, and it just flies from your pocket, from your bag, and then you'll never see it again. That's a 99.99, maybe even more percentage of the time. So here the verse is stressing extremes. In any extreme, the Lord can decide anything. From our perspective, we should take care of doing the duty, which is like protecting our money properly or protecting our health properly. So sometimes it's just a question of we can't blame the Lord if you are neglectful of certain things. You don't close the door, and then they're full of animals, dogs and jackals inside, and this and that. Then obviously it's our fault. We can't say, "Oh, Krishna wanted it." And if there are some special cases, we may try to understand if there is a plan of the Lord, or if it's simply our neglect, our negligence. But those are kind of special cases.
Sometimes it does happen. Like a while ago when we were in Bangalore, me and my dad were going somewhere, and then when we arrived at the supermarket, because I'd forgotten a bag, and then we went to get it, and then I realized I didn't have my phone, and then I was so like, oh my God, where is it? Did I leave it in the bike? And then when I rushed to the bike, and it was not in there in the bike, and then like, oh God, where did it get lost? And then when we went home, then suddenly it was like my brother said, oh, you were talking with your friend, it was in the bike, but I actually took it and kept it. And I was thinking, probably it was like Krishna's inspiration that he took it, because maybe if we just left the bike in the main road, then maybe the phone would have been stolen. So there are circumstances when you like look back and say, wow, this is Yoga Maya, right? Something else happened. You remember, we thought this is Yoga Maya. Somebody didn't see, like we got a visa or some situation. When we can sometimes feel that there is higher hand. There's like Krishna covering the vision of somebody and allowing certain things to happen. Yeah, maybe you also have some of those experiences. It's very distracting. Anything else? Any other question? If you have any question, you can just put it in the chat box. Thank you. Or you can raise your hand. Let's read the verse.
Utani tastairnija yoni karma bir bhavanti kale navanti sarvashah natatra atma prakrita vapistithas tasya gunair anyatamo vibhadyate.
Every conditioned soul receives a different type of body according to his work. And when the engagement is finished, the body is finished. Although the spirit soul is situated in subtle and gross material bodies in different forms of life, he is not bound by them, for he is always understood to be completely different from the manifested body. Purport. Here it is very plainly explained that God is not responsible for the living entities accepting different types of bodies. One has to accept a body according to the laws of nature and one's own karma. Therefore, the Vedic injunction is that a person engaged in material activities should be given directions by which he can intelligently apply his activities to the service of the Lord, to become free from the material bondage of repeated birth and death. Swakarmanatham abhyarcha siddhim vindati manava. The Lord is always ready to give directions. Oh, that's so sweet. Indeed, his directions are elaborately given in the Bhagavad Gita. If we take advantage of these directions, then in spite of our being conditioned by the laws of material nature, we shall become free to attain our original constitution. Mamevaye prapadyante mayami tam tarantite. We should have firm faith that the Lord is supreme and that if we surrender to him, he will take charge of us and indicate how we can get out of this material world, material life and return back home, back to Godhead. Without such surrender, one is obliged to accept a certain type of body according to his karma, sometimes as an animal, sometimes a demigod, and so on. Although the body is obtained and lost in due course of time, the spirit soul does not actually mix with the body, but is subjugated by the particular modes of nature with which he is simply associated. Spiritual education changes one's consciousness so that one simply carries out the orders of the Supreme Lord and becomes free from the influence of the modes of material nature.
Okay, so the one important thing here is that although we are prisoners of this samsara, then Krishna comes, gives us the Bhagavad Gita, and Srila Prabhupada says if we take advantage of these directions, we shall become free. So we are conditioned, but if we listen, if we are obedient, then we can become free.
Why is it sometimes hard for some people to be obedient and for some others it's easier?
Well, there are different reasons. Some people have stronger samskara, stronger vasanas, meaning stronger impressions and stronger desires due to being very sinful, very bad habit, very ingrained, deeply ingrained habits. And also some people don't have much faith because to obey somebody, you need to have trust. People may have a very superficial understanding who is Krishna. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, if one understands that he's the supreme controller, the supreme friend, the Lord, and the enjoyer, then of course one achieves peace because he will feel that the benevolent Lord is always in control, and so he or she will voluntarily surrender to the will of God. But if one resists the will of God because he doesn't have much faith in God, or you may even think, well, if I surrender to God, all the fun is gone, then of course you may not have that inspiration. So it's not mechanical, it's based on the trust.
So if there is a devotee who wants to really, is really tired of material life, wants to follow the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, but is finding it hard, finding it very difficult and cannot, and really struggling, what can be a principle that can help them to do as much as they can, or how do you console somebody who is unable to due to
Depends on
different
what
reasons?
kind of obstacle the person finds. You say you cannot be obeyed to Bhagavad Gita. What aspect of the Bhagavad Gita cannot obey? You cannot chant the holy name, you cannot be vegetarian. What kind of aspect?
Mind control, sense control, mind control, sense control. Some people just don't have.
Well, one should see the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, let me read the Bhagavad Gita verse. This is Bhagavad Gita.
Should I also put it up on the screen or?
Oh, let's see. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 31. Those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and will follow this teaching faithfully, without envy, become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. I skipped some. An ordinary man with firm faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of the law of karma. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one may not fully discharge the injunctions of the Lord, but because one is not resentful of this principle and works sincerely without consideration of defeat and hopelessness, he will surely be promoted to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. So, okay, first of all, is the question, can't really the person not do it? That's a big question. Because somebody may just say, oh, I cannot, but in certain condition, he will be able to. That's a big question. But even for argument's sake, that, okay, the person cannot follow certain injunction, here it says, follow discharge injunctions, but because it's not resentful of this principle and works sincerely, then it become promoted to the stage. So, yeah, maybe somebody who smokes 20 cigarettes a day, he cannot immediately give up. So, okay, can they do 10 a day, 5 a day, 2 a day, 1 a day? Still, it's not following, but it's like working to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, okay, one cannot give up meat. Okay, at least give up red meat and start eating just chicken or something, or maybe just eggs, like that. So they may not still be able to follow fully, but they're working on it. They're doing something to minimize the sin, minimize the uncontrolled senses. So I think this is a relevant verse.
Yeah, what is it? 331. Idam shariram puram iyate graham yatodikai parvata yatodikai partiva tejasai jana kalena jato vikrito vinashyati. Just as a householder, although different from the identity of his house, thinks his house to be identical with him, so the conditioned soul, due to ignorance, accepts the body to be himself, although the body is actually different from the soul. This body is obtained through a combination of portions of earth, water, and fire. And when the earth, water, and fire are transformed in the course of time, the body is vanquished. The soul has nothing to do with this creation and dissolution of the body. Therefore, we transmigrate from one body to another in bodies that are products of our illusion. But as spirit souls, we always exist separately from material condition and life. The example given here is that a house or car is always different from its owner. But because of attachment, the conditioned soul thinks it to be identical with him. A car or house is actually made of material elements. As long as the material elements combine together properly, the car or house, and when they are disassembled, the car or house exists. And when they are disassembled, the house or the car is disassembled. The spirit soul, however, always remains as he is. But this morning I was listening to a class, and in the class there was an example of the other side of when the mind is everything, the mind creates everything. So there was this person who felt that, oh, there's a frog in my stomach. And then this person went to different doctors, and the doctor said, no, you don't have any frog in your stomach. They scanned the stomach and said, no, you don't have any frog in your stomach. Then this person went to 11 different doctors, and everybody said, no, you don't have frog in your stomach. Then finally, this person went to a particular doctor, and the doctor understood the problem. And this person said, yeah, you're right. There's a frog in your stomach. You need to perform surgery. And then this person is like, oh, finally, doctor. Nobody was believing me. Finally, you believe this. And then the doctor said, okay, let's prepare you for surgery. And then this doctor told the nurse, go there, go and get some frog. They're lying there, get it. So then they got this frog, and then when they did this surgery, they showed this frog and said, you see, we found this in his stomach. And then this person was really peaceful, very nice, very nice. And then this person went home. And then when the person went home for some days, this person is very happy. And then after a few days, then this person feels, this frog which was inside my stomach has put babies in the stomach. And I have babies and frogs in my stomach. So then the conclusion in the class about this point was that we sometimes create problems in our head. It's all in our mind. Mahaprabhu says that this is good, this is bad. It's all our own mental concoction. So similarly here, the house is not even us. The car is not even us. But then we start becoming identified. This is my husband. This is my child. This is my home. Then little thing that happens to it, we just start thinking, oh, I have a frog in my stomach. But there is no frog in your stomach. Okay. It's a funny one. Please, any of you have any questions, please feel free. Bhante Prabhu is very knowledgeable, and let's take advantage of his knowledge. You can also ask questions if you have. So one of us will answer. Okay, next you can read the verse.
Yathanalo dharusho bhinna iyate yathanilo dihagata pritakstita yathana bhasarvagatam apuman sarva gunashaya para. Translation. He has still Yamaraja in the form of a young boy who's preaching to the relatives of King Suyajna. As fire, although situated in wood, is perceived to be different from the wood, as air, although situated within the mouth and nostrils, is perceived to be separate, and as the sky, although all-pervading, never mixes with anything. Sky here means ether, space. Never mixes with anything. So the living entity, although now encaged within the material body, of which it is the source, is separate from it. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of God has explained that material energy and spiritual energy both emanate from Him. The material energy is described as me bhinna prakriti ashtada. The 8 separated energies of the Lord, but although the 8 gross and subtle material energies, namely earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego, are stated to be bhinna, separated from the Lord, actually they're not. As fire appears separate from wood, and as the air flowing through the nostrils and mouth of the body appears separate from the body, so the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appears separate from the living being, but is actually separate and not separate simultaneously. This is the philosophy of Chinta Bheda, Bheda Tattva, propounded by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. According to the reactions of karma, the living being appears separate from the supernatural Godhead, but actually is very intimately related with the Lord. Consequently, even though we now seem neglected by the Lord, is actually always alert to our activities. Under all circumstances, therefore, we should simply depend on the supremacy of the Supreme Personality of God, and thus revive our intimate relationship with Him. We must depend upon the authority and control of the Supreme Personality of God. So in one sense, this whole section is like a refresher of Krishna Consciousness 101, the basics that we are not the body. And this refresher is refreshing because sometimes we may get into so many different aspects of theology, but forget the basic idea. So here, through Yamaraja, through a powerful analogy, he says, fire is different than wood, although it's in wood. The air that passes through the nose and the mouth is different than the nose and the mouth. Similarly, Nabha is the sky or ether or space. Space is everywhere, but at the same time, it's not sajjate. It's mixed, doesn't mix with anything. It remains separate. Tatha Puman Sarva Gunashraya Paraha. So the living entity, Puman, the person, Sarva Gunashraya, although now the shelter of the modes of material nature, Paraha, transcendental to material contamination. Asangoyam Purushaha. This is a Vedic teaching that the soul never mixes with the material elements. Although, of course, now it says Sarvaguna Ashraya, and now it's like the target, or it's completely under the influences of the three gunas, but does not mix with the three gunas. One analogy is given is like a crystal. The crystal is there, and say a rose, a red flower is there, and the red flower projects this color on the crystal, but the crystal remains always separate from the red color of the flower. So similarly, the self, by its very nature, doesn't mix with the material element, but its consciousness gets affected by the various gunas. And as a result, as the first result of the false ego, he identifies with the material body.
So it's because of the modes of nature that, what is it when we say usually it's the modes? Doesn't it mean basically it's our weakness that we get affected by the modes?
We associate with different modes. We choose to associate with different modes. And that, once we choose to associate with different modes, obviously they have a great influence. See, because Prakriti is also divine, Daiviyesha Guna Mahi. So we are superior energy, and matter is an inferior energy, but just the quantity and the power, and also because the Supreme Lord is behind this energy, the force of time and the control of the Lord is behind this energy. It's just like if you say, okay, if you have a glass of water or even a bucket of water, it's completely under control because you are a human being, and the bucket of water is just 7-8 liters of water. So you can take bath, you can wash the floor, and just throw it, or just water the plants. That water is completely under your control, is inferior to you. But at the same time, you expand that water into an ocean, then that ocean has control over you. You dropped in that ocean, you don't have enough energy to swim back to the shore. So the same water, due to quantity, is overwhelming. So yes, these gunas are overwhelming for the soul, but the soul has got the free will to say, no, I want to associate with the Lord, with the Lord's instructions.
So all these things like social media, internet, billboards, people that we work under, all these things can be compared to the ocean that can actually overwhelm us, right?
Well, depends. Again, I mean, the billboards, you don't generally spend so much time looking at the billboard, especially if we advertise something like a, say, course in engineering, you may not be interested at all. So it doesn't have much influence on you. Or some advertising for some cigarettes, you may not feel any attraction for that billboard. Internet, yeah, it's like an ocean, depends where you go on the internet. There are few instructive places or useful places, and there are a lot of junk, a lot of degrading places in the internet, or at least this just distracting, just spending time watching cats or things like that. So what else you said that
people that we work around, they may be tamasik, they may be.
Of course, we need to choose our association. Sometimes we have to deal with the tamasic people. Like for instance, say we are on a flight, 4 hours flight, and the next person next to you is just eating some chicken,
Chicken.
and it just it's a smell, and then he takes a drink, so, he asks for wine, he asks for beer. So, okay, but that's, doesn't affect you. It's not, I never heard a devotee who, because the guy
Fell down.
was, because the guy was eating chicken, and he also starts eating chicken, or he also starts, but so sometimes it's just a question of tolerate. You're not really taking any association from the guy. It's just okay, he's a tamasic guy, so somehow he's sitting next to you, and he eats all sorts of garbage, and he drinks all sorts of garbage, and you don't care. When we have a choice to spend time, so it's not that there is a saying, no, catch the fish without getting wet. Sometimes we may have to work, and the environment of the work is very degraded, and people are low class, and the boss is low class. And like in Japan, there is this thing that sometimes people are almost forced to drink because the boss say, no, we should all drink, we should celebrate some sale or something, and people feel forced. They have to drink, otherwise the boss becomes angry, upset, and will ostracize the person. But for the devotees, it's okay, even if they have to deal with some materialistic people, okay, they tolerate, they try to act in as gentlemanly or ladylike way as possible, and they move on. But of course, if we get involved, if the colleagues say, hey, let's go to this sport event, or let's go for this movie, or let's go, and then the person is not strong, is okay, go, then of course, then those things become more important. Okay.
You said catch the fish without getting wet. You can also say like be like a lotus in the water, but don't belong to the water.
Yeah. So catch a fish meaning sometimes you have to have a job, you have to get the salary, and so catch the fish means get the salary, but don't get degraded by the association. Just do emotionally the minimum you can in that environment, do your duties, and then you think of the rest of your life.
Suyagyo nanmayam sejata.
Shete.
Suyagyo nanmayam shete. Madhuyam shochata. Yashrotaya nuvakta. How does it?
Yashrotayo nuvakteha.
Bhakteha sanadrishyate karhichit. Yamaraja continued, all lamenterers. It's the first time I hear that word, lamenterers. Lamenterers. You're all fools. The person's name Suyagya for whom you lament is still lying before you and has not gone anywhere. Then what is the cause for your lamentation? Previously, he heard you and replied to you, but now not finding him, you're lamenting. This is contradictory behavior, for you have never actually seen the person within the body you heard and replied. There is no need for your lamentation, for the body you have always seen is lying here. True. Purport. This instruction by Yamaraja is in the form of a boy is understandable even for a common man. A common man who considers the body the self is certainly comparable to an animal. Yasyatma bhutti kunape tridhatuke sa eva gokharaha. But even a common man can understand that even a common man can understand that after death the person is gone. Although the body is still there, a dead man's relatives lament that the person has gone away. For the common man sees the body cannot see the soul. As described in Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe, the soul, the proprietor of the body, is within. After death, when the breath within the nostrils is stopped, one can understand that the person within the body who is hearing and replying has now gone. Therefore, in effect, the common man concludes that actually the spirit soul was different from the body and has now gone away. Thus, even a common man coming to his senses can know that the real person who is within the body and was hearing and replying was never seen. For that which was never seen, what is the need of lamentation?
Next. Nashrot nanu vaktayam mukyo pyadbramaha nasu yastvi hindriyavanatma sachanyaha pranadehayo. In the body, the most important substance is the life air. But that also is neither the listener nor the speaker. Beyond even the life air, the soul also can do nothing. For the super soul is actually the director in cooperation with the individual soul. The super soul conducting the activities of the body is different from the body and living force. Prabhupada, the Supreme Personality of God, distinctly says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Sarvasya Chaham Ridhi Sanivishto Matas Mritir Gyanam Aponam Cha. Quote, I'm seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness, unquote. Although the Atma or soul is present in every material body, the Hinos Minyatadehe is not actually the chief person acting through the senses, mind, and so on. The soul can merely act in cooperation with the super soul because it is the super soul who gives him direction to act or not to act. Mattasmiti Gyanam Aponam Cha. One cannot act without his sanction. For the super soul is Upadrashta and Anumanta, the witness and sanctioner. One who studies carefully under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master can understand the real knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually the conductor of all the activities of the individual soul and the controller of the results as well. Although the individual soul possesses the indriyas or senses, is not actually the proprietor. For the proprietor is the super soul. Consequently, the super soul is called Rishikesha, and the individual soul is advised by the direction of the super soul to surrender to him and thus be happy. Sarva dharmam parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Thus he can become immortal and be transferred to the spiritual kingdom, where he will achieve the highest success of an eternal blissful life of knowledge. In conclusion, the individual soul is different from the body, senses, living force, and the airs within the body. And above him is the super soul, who gives the individual soul all facilities. The individual soul who renders everything. The super soul lives very happily within the body.
So we must have faith that whatever is happening in our life, and especially if we're conscious, and let the Lord guide us and to not get into lamentation or anchoring. It's very basic philosophy.
Yes, this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita as the 5 factors of action. This is chapter 18, text 14.
Should I go there?
If you like. That should be quick. 18:14.
Oh, 18.
So adhishtanam.
Wait, one second.
So adhishtanam, the place, means the body where the action is done. Tata karta, the author, that means the soul who decides to do something. Karanam, the senses. And pritak vidham, these are different kinds of chishta endeavors, the efforts. Then Daivam, the supreme, Cha Eva Atra Panchama. The fifth and most important is the Daivam, God, the supreme, is the super soul. Daivam, the supreme, the super soul, different translations. So ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada explained, without the sanction of Paramatma, the soul can't remember anything and can't decide to do anything, ultimately. Or even if it can decide to do something, it may not fulfill, it may not do it correctly. Like we see in sports also, people try to put the ball in the net, whatever net, basketball, football, or whatever. It tries to put the ball in the net, water ball, something like that. But sometimes, because some same effort as a result, and some same effort as a different result. So both the action and the results are in the hand of God. At the same time, the soul is the author of the action, is responsible for the reactions. That's the whole karma, that one chooses to do things and then is caught up by the results.
So the karta dilemma is how we can sort it out in conclusion. Who is the doer?
The doer is the soul, karta, the worker, the doer, no karta, the person who does the action, but is not independently doing the action, because first of all, the material nature, there is the body, the senses, so that's not under control of him, Rishikesha. So the super soul is the ultimate controller, but it controls according to the desires and the wishes and the decisions of the soul. So the super soul never gets involved in karma because it's beyond. It has no desires. It has not no involvement in the. It is not involved in generating a conditioned soul, in conditioned action, but the soul is responsible for the action, although it may not be controlling completely the action. Isn't a desire generate action?
Meaning, doesn't a desire generate action naturally?
That's the different concept. That's text 18. Okay, go there. So verse 14 describes the
18 or 14?
text 14 describes the factor of the action, and text 18 describes the factors that motivate the action. So knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower. So jnana, knowledge, meaning according to the knowledge of the person. Yeah, the person has a desire, say for instance, say that the knower, the soul, has experienced pleasure in eating mangoes. Then, of course, he has a desire for mangoes. That's his knowledge. That's the bulk of his experience. Then the gayam, the objective of knowledge. Oh, he knows the mangoes are sweet, the mangoes are juicy, and he knows that he likes mangoes. Parigyata, the knower. So trividha, the three kinds, karma chodana, the impetus, or Srila Prabhupada said, the factors that motivate action. So yes, that's the first verse 14 describes the factors. And this is like the psychological motivator, the psychological impulse. And then there is the second part, the senses, the work, and the doer are the three constituents of action. So Srila Prabhupada explains that before one acts, there is some impetus, which is called inspiration. any solution arrived that before work is actualized is a subtle form of work. So yes, desire is an essential element in this process. What's the impetus for that? Yeah, that's the sum of the experiences, the desires, and the tendency that one has developed, and the knowledge. Some people are very, very like a dog has only knowledge of okay, it's a good place to sleep, a good place for people to get food, like that. That's the knowledge of a dog or a doggish person. So as higher as the knowledge, higher will be the impulse. So it's like a dog may not, I mean, there's no God, so it's not acting out of God, but he acts according to the master because he trusts the master. Master says sit, they sit, and so on. So the dog may undergo austerities, like the master says, don't eat, and the dog doesn't eat. But of course, it's just in the material sphere. Devoted to the Lord, like a dog of God. If God says, today you fast, the devotee fasts. Okay.
Okay. We go back to the
Bhagavatam. Okay, we go next.
Mutendriya manolingan deha uchavacham bhajatyush utsrijati hyanyas tachapi svena tejasa. 5 material elements, the 10 senses and the mind all combine to form the various parts of the gross and subtle bodies. The living entity comes in contact with his material bodies, whether high or low, and later gives them up by his personal prowess. This strength can be perceived in a living entity's personal power to possess different types of bodies. Purport. The conditioned soul has knowledge, and if he wants to fully utilize the gross and subtle bodies for his real advancement in life, he can do so. It is therefore said that by his high intelligence, Svena Tejasa, by the superior power of superior knowledge achieved from the right source, the spiritual master or acharya, he can give up his conditional life in a material body and return home back to Godhead. However, if he wants to keep himself in the darkness of the material world, he can do so. The Lord confirms this in the following. The Lord confirms this as follows in Bhagavad Gita 9:25. Yanti deva vrata devan pitrinyanti pitrivrata bhutani bhutija yanti madhya jinopimam. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. Those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors. And those who worship me will live with me. The human form of body is valuable. One can use this body to go to higher planetary systems, to Pitriloka, or he can remain in this lower planetary system. But if one tries, he can also go back, he can also return home back to Godhead. This promise is given. This promise is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a super soul. Therefore, the Lord says, Mata smritir jnanam apohanam cha. From me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. If one wants to receive real knowledge from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from bondage to repeated acceptance of material bodies. If one takes to devotional service of the Lord and surrenders unto Him, the Lord is prepared to give directions by which to return home back to Godhead. But if one foolishly wants to accept himself in darkness, wants to keep himself in darkness, he can continue in a life of material existence. So the willpower is a major player, right?
Of course, it's the human form of life. One decides what he wants to do. Wants to be religious, irreligious, wants to listen to the saints, or wants to listen to the sinners.
Sometimes they're in very difficult circumstances. We call it dharma sankata. Like we don't want to do something, but we call it hottepadu, means for the sake of living, to feed our bellies. Sometimes we have to do some tasks like business or lying or some sort of thing. But doesn't that degrade us? And how do we protect ourselves against that if we don't have maybe great karma in certain regards?
But that's explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Every action is covered by some fault. And Srila Prabhupada says, gives the example, the businessman may say some lies, or for you will make no profit, but actually the businessman cannot exist without profit. So every action is covered by some fault, but there are different degrees of faults. In the sense, like, okay, you drive, you're an Uber driver, and you kill so many ants while you drive because you drive all day. You kill so many insects, but that's your duty. You can't really be an Uber driver and not kill insects. So that's kind of understood. At the end, you have to do some charity. You have to change the names and so on. So that will be. But certain things are too much. Like if you get a job as a butcher, that you have to kill animals, or you have to produce meat products, then you may want to choose that. No, that's too much. So there are degrees. And so people should accept a certain degree of what you call covering, but not accept other degrees of covering. Also, the same thing can be done, even a businessman doesn't have to necessarily cheat the customer. Can put products which are not, which are healthy products, doesn't have to make money with things which are bad for the customers necessarily. So there are degrees of how much imperfection we want to accept in a job.
Good points.
So Yavalingam vito yatma tavat karma nibandhanam tato viparyaya klesho maya yogo nuvartate. As long as the spirit soul is covered by the subtle body, consisting of the mind, intelligence, and false ego, is bound to the results of his fruitive activities. Because of this covering, the spirit soul is connected with the material energy and must accordingly suffer material conditions and reversals continually, life after life. Purport of Srila Prabhupada, living entity is bound by the subtle body, consisting of the mind, intelligence, and false ego. The time of death, therefore, the position of the mind becomes the cause for the next body. It's confirmed Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam Yam Vapi Smaram Bhavan Tyajate Ante Kalevaram. At the time of death, the mind sets the criteria for the spirit soul being carried to another type of body. If a living being resists the dictation of the mind and engages the mind in the loving service of the Lord, the mind cannot degrade him. The duty of all human beings, therefore, is to keep the mind always engaged at the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayo. When the mind is engaged at the lotus feet of Krishna, the intelligence is purified, and then the intelligence gets inspiration from the super soul. Tadami Buddhi Yogantam. Thus, the living entity makes progress toward liberation from material bondage. The individual in the living soul is subject to the laws of fruitive activity, but the super soul, Paramatma, is not affected by the fruitive activities of the individual soul. As confirmed in the Vedic Upanishad, the Paramatma and the Jivatma, who are likened to two birds, are sitting in the body. The Jivatma is enjoying or suffering by eating the fruits of the bodily activities, but the Paramatma, who is free from such bondage, witnesses and sanctions the activity of the individual soul as the individual soul desires.
Seems there is some problem in hearing. Maybe it's a connection, maybe it's the voice, maybe we need it.
Well, you can ask everybody. If it's from everybody, it's just him, just her.
Yeah, Rajeshwari Radhika Mataji Gokul Leela, are you able to hear us clearly or are you finding it a little hard? Just wondering if you can hear us. Okay. Okay. Maybe maybe the internet connection or something.
Of this.
Of Snehevati, yeah.
Okay, so very thankfully, Srila Prabhupada gives always the solution, gives always the way out.
True.
Although the verse speaks about, condition of the soul, Srila Prabhupada also kind of goes, okay, but we can, if a living being resists the dictation of the mind and engages the mind in Krishna consciousness, then mind cannot degrade.
Similar to the Vachu Vegam, right? The Vegam will be there will be the impulse.
Yes.
So we don't need to give in to that impulse and act on the impulse. Even great devotees may have impulse, but they have the ability to reduce the distance between the impulse and acting, and they don't act and they think.
Reduce, extend, increase. Increase the gap.
Right, sorry, yeah, increase the gap. This is done, right? Vitha abhiniveshoyam yadgunishvata drigvacha yata manoratha swapna sarvamaindriyakam risha. It is fruitless to see and talk of the material modes of nature and the resultant so-called happiness and distress as if they were factual. When the mind wanders during the day, then the man begins to think himself extremely important, or when he dreams at night and sees a beautiful woman enjoying with him. These are merely false dreams. Similarly, the happiness and distress caused by material senses should be understood to be meaningless. Another question. It's a question about the previous. What to do when there is a sudden strong impulse comes to do something? How to control ourselves at that time? What to do in sudden impulse?
It depends on the impulse, obviously. This is a general question. But the point is that, can you put it back to chat? Point is how to control ourselves at the time. That's exactly the time where we need to control ourselves. Because if there is no impulse, there's nothing to control. Like for instance, if you ate your lunch and you're peacefully digesting, it was a very good lunch, very satisfactory, the mind is peaceful, the body is full, then you're not attracted to something in the street, some fried, some potato chips or something. So there's no need of, there's no temptation, so there's no need of control. So the principle is just, control means there is some temptation, there is some impulse, there is some vega, there is some push of the senses. And depending on what's the impulse, there may be different tactics, different strategies. The general idea is that all these, we could say, illegitimate impulses, because impulses are legitimate. Somebody is very tired, exhausted, needs to go to sleep, he needs to go to sleep. It's nothing sinful or nothing inappropriate. Or somebody is very hungry and should find something legitimate to eat. So there are impulses which are legitimate, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, we should fulfill them in an appropriate way. But if there is some inappropriate impulse, everything is centered around the mind. So we should bring the mind somewhere else. So we have the techniques, either we go for knowledge, we go for Bhagavatam, we open the Bhagavatam, read loud, and so the mind gets cleared, gets cleared up, or we chant Hare Krishna very loud. Now we can take a japa walk, maybe move ourselves from the place of temptation or impulse, or maybe just ask a friend, pick up the phone, what's up, and ask a friend, look, I'm having this, whatever it is. I'm talking in general because the question was general, depending on which senses are under
Attack.
attack, you could say, or under which sense, under the attack of which sense are we? Now you can ask for help. Now, look, I'm having this, thinking to do something stupid, just like somebody wants to say commit suicide, they need to talk with somebody, and the person needs to help, or the person consider the consequences and so on. So yeah, take help if you can. There's self-help. Grab your japa, or grab your book, or grab a friend, or just go for a run, go for a jogging, go for depending on the inputs, how strong it is, how sinful it is, how is the object of the senses right there. But there are different situations. But main thing is the sincerity. Sincerity meaning the willingness to pay the price of that tolerance. Tolerance is suffering. It's tapa. Tolerance of an impulse. So are we willing to pay the price and tolerate, or the first push we just fall down?
What is it you always say? Either there is the pain of repentance or the pain of discipline.
Yeah, discipline is also painful until we master the discipline, or until we get some higher tastes, or the pain of losing spiritual knowledge, spiritual consciousness, or fading, feeling depressed, or resentful, or repenting. So, should we read this?
Can't control my impulse.
Huh?
Cannot control my impulse.
So, should we read the purpose?
Yes. The happiness and distress derived from the activities of material senses are not actual happiness and distress. What does that mean? Meaning they're not permanent.
Well, it's just a stimulation of the senses, nothing to do with the soul, and just some impressions on the mind.
Therefore, Bhagavad Gita speaks of happiness that is transcendental to the material conception of life. Sukham atyantikam yat tad bhutti grahyam atindriyam. When our senses are purified of material contamination, they become atindriya, transcendental senses. And when the transcendental senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesha, one can derive real transcendental pleasure. Whatever distress or happiness we manufacture by mental concoction through the subtle mind, has no reality, but it's simply a mental concoction. One should therefore not imagine so-called happiness through mental concoction. Rather, the best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord, Rishikesha, and thus feel real blissful life. This is a Vedic statement.
There is a text.
Oh, there is a Vedic statement. Apama somam amrita abhuma apsarabhir viharama.
You don't have your spectacles? Where?
With reference to such a conception, one wants to go to the heavenly planets to enjoy with the girls there and drink somarasa. Oh, that's absolute here. Such imaginary pleasure, however, has no value. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:23, Antavantatu phalam tesham tad bhavati alpamedasam. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Even by virtue of activity or worship of demigods, one is elevated to higher planetary systems for sense enjoyment. The situation is condemned in Bhagavad Gita as antavat, perishable. The happiness one enjoys in this way is like pleasure of embracing a young woman in a dream. For some time it may be pleasing, but actually the basic principle is false. The mental concoctions of happiness and distress in this material world are compared to dreams because of their falseness. All thoughts of obtaining happiness by using material senses have a false background and therefore have no meaning. And sometimes we're thinking, there was that story. There was this man who had 2 pots of ghee, and then he went and was telling somebody, oh, I have these 2 pots of ghee, I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to, with the profit, I'll buy a sheep, and then with that sheep, I will produce wool, and from that wood, I will sell clothes, and then from that clothes, I will be able to have children, and then I will tell one of my sons, hey, don't do that, and then he does a hand like that, and then the 2 pots of ghee breaks. So sometimes we're dreaming of some big things in life we want to achieve, but then we're not maybe being present in the here and now and taking full advantage of how we can create a better literally tomorrow, how to strengthen my mind now. What can I do in the next 24 hours that my mind can remain Krishna conscious, instead of dreaming like maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what if that happens? What if this happens? Both we can do it in Tamas Guna or in Rajas Guna. Tamas Guna is like lamenting and saying, what if things go wrong? And if I'm not happy, if I don't get married or something. And Rajas Guna is like, I'm going to become that, and I'm going to become this, and I'm going to have these many followers, and I'm going to enjoy. It's all just total speculation. अथा नित्यम् अनित्यं वा नेह शोचन्ति तद्विधा नन्यता शक्यते कर्तुं स्वभावासो शोचताम् इति. Those of full knowledge of self-realization who know very well that the spirit soul is eternal, whereas the body is perishable, are not overwhelmed by lamentation. But persons who lack knowledge of self-realization certainly lament. Therefore, it is difficult to educate people in illusion. That is so true. We can't give faith to a faithless person. Purport. According to the Mimamsha philosophers, everything is eternal, nitya. And according to the Shankya philosophers, everything is mithya or anitya, impermanent. Nonetheless, without real knowledge of Atma, the soul, such philosophers must be bewildered and must continue to lament as Shudras. Srila Sukadeva Goswami therefore said to Parikshit, Maharaj Parikshit, Shrotavyadini Rajendra Nrinam Shanti Sahasrasaha Apashyatam Atma Tattvam Griheshu Grahamedinam. Those who are materially engrossed, being blind to knowledge of the ultimate truth, have many subjects for hearing in human society. O Emperor, Bhagavatam 2:1-2. Ordinary persons engaged in material activities, there are many subject matters to understand, because such persons do not understand self-realization. One must therefore be educated in self-realization, so that under any circumstances in life, he will remain steady in his vows. Anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah, see, Maya offers unlimited ramification and branching off of subjects. See, Karl Marx used to say that religion is the opiate of people, but in fact, we see that nowadays sport is the opium for people, because people can absorb themselves in so many different sports, and each sports has got local, national, international championships, and there are different heroes, as people, heroes, different stars one can follow, and there are so many, literally hundreds of sports in which one can fix the mind, and so it's like it's endless how this conditioned soul can engage. Or movies, so there are thousands of movies coming out every year, and all sorts of genre, all sorts of actors, all sorts of music. There are thousands of CDs or whatever we call it now. So definitely, and in politics, there are tons and rivers of political news every day from different outlets, newspaper, printed, online, and televisions. Nowadays, people have often 200, 300 channels of television. So anyway, I was just meditating on how Maya, yes, it gives this, it's called Shruta Sahasrasar, thousands of subjects for listening, for putting the mind. And but Srila Prabhupada says must therefore be educated in self-realization. One have to understand, no, this is not a world, or this is like a dream, it's like a nightmare, like a dream. And so so that under any circumstances in life, he will remain steady in his vows. Vows with the body for vows, of course, following the principles and chanting rounds and using free time in devotional service. So otherwise, one is like a little cork in the ocean. It's just thrown here and there and everywhere by the waves. And they lament because there's always cause of lamentation. There's never full satisfaction. There's always something doesn't go according to their desire, or even if they are successful, there's always more greed or envy for somebody who's more successful.
That's so true.
Okay. Next.
One more and then we can. Lubdako vipine kaschit pakshinam nirmitondaka vitatya jalam vidade tatra tatra pralobhayan. There was once a hunter who lured birds with food and captured them after spreading a net. He lived as if appointed by death, personified as the killer of the birds. Purport. This is another incident from the histories.
Yes, so should we read the story?
Okay. Yeah, they are very interesting story. Okay.
I can read. Kulinga mitunam tatra vicharat samadrishyata tayo kulingi sahasa lubdha kena pralobhita. While wandering the forest, the hunter saw a pair of kulinga birds. Of the two, the female was captivated by the hunter's lure. Sasajjata sichastantrya mahishakalayantrita kulingastantadapannam hiriksha brisha dukitaha snehat akalpa kripanaha kripanam paryadevayat. O queens of Suyajna, the name, what?
You can just go here next.
Okay. O queens of Suyajna, the male kulinga bird, seeing his wife put into the greatest danger in the grip of providence, became very unhappy. Because of affection, the poor bird, being unable to release her, began to lament for his wife. Aho akaruno deva priya karunaya vibhuhu kripanama manusho chantya dhinaya kim karishati. Alas, how merciless is providence. My wife, unable to be helped by anyone, is in such an awkward position, lamenting for me. What will providence gain by taking away this poor bird? What will be the profit? Kamana yatumam deva kimardhena atmanohi me dinena jivata dukham anena vidurayusha. If unkind providence takes away my wife with half my body, why should it not take me also? What is the use of my living with half of my body, bereaved by loss of my wife? What shall I gain in this way? Kathan tvajata paksham stan matrihinam bibharmyaham mandabhagya pratikshante need mam mataram prajaha. The unfortunate baby birds bereft of their mother are waiting in the nest for her to feed them. They are still very small, have not yet grown their wings. How shall I be able to maintain them? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The bird is lamenting for the mother of his children because the mother naturally maintains and cares for the children. Yamaraja, however, in the guise of a small boy, has already explained that although his mother left him uncared for and wandering in the forest, the tigers and other ferocious animals had not eaten him. The real fact is that if the Supreme Personality of God protects one, even though one may be motherless and fatherless, one can be maintained by the goodwill of the Lord. Otherwise, if the Supreme Lord does not give one protection, one must suffer in spite of the presence of his father and mother. Another example is that sometimes the patient dies in spite of a good physician and good medicine. Thus, without the protection of the Lord, one cannot live with or without parents. Another point in this verse is that fathers and mothers have protecting feelings for their children, even in bird and beast society, not to speak of human society. Kali Yuga, however, is so degraded that father and mother even kill their children in the womb on the plea of their scientific knowledge that within the womb the child has no life. Prestigious medical practitioners give this opinion, and therefore the father and mother of this day kill their children within the womb. How degraded human society has become. Their scientific knowledge is so advanced that they think that within the egg and the embryo there is no life. Now these so-called scientists are receiving Nobel Prizes for advancing the theory of chemical evolution. But if chemical combinations are the source of life, why don't the scientists manufacture something like an egg through chemistry and put it in an incubator so the chicken will come out? What is the answer? With their scientific knowledge, they are unable to create even an egg. The scientists are describing Bhagavad Gita as Maya Parita Jnana, fools whose real knowledge has been taken away. They are not men of knowledge, but they pose as scientists and philosophers, although their so-called theoretical knowledge cannot produce practical results. So should we see what happens with this bird? Evam kulingam bila pantamarat priya viyoga turamashrukantam so evatam shakunika sharena vidhyada kala prahito vilina. Because of the loss of his wife, the kulinga bird lamented with tears in his eyes. Meanwhile, following the dictation of mature time, the hunter, who was very carefully hidden in the distance, released his arrow, which pierced the body of the kulinga bird and killed him. Evam yuyam apasyantya atmapayam abuddhayaha nainam prapsyata shochantyaha patim varsha shatairapi. Thus Yamaraja, in the guise of a small boy, told all the queens, "You are all so foolish that you lament but do not see your own death. Afflicted by a poor fund of knowledge, you do not know that even if you lament for your dead husband for hundreds of years, you will never get him back alive. In the meantime, your lives will be finished."
Oh my God.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Yamaraj once asked Maharaj Yudhishthira, "What is the most wonderful thing within this world?" Maharaj Yudhishthira replied, Mahabharat Vanaparna, Vanaparva 3:13, 1:16. Ahanyahani bhutani gachanti yamalayam sheshastavaramichanti kimascharyam athaparam. Hundreds and thousands of living entities meet death at every moment, but a foolish living being nonetheless thinks himself deathless and does not prepare for death. This is the most wonderful thing in this world. Everyone has to die because everyone is fully under the control of material nature. Yet everyone thinks that he is independent, that whatever he likes he can do, that he will never meet death, will live forever, and so on. So-called scientists are making various plans by which living entities in the future can live forever. But while they are thus pursuing such scientific knowledge, Yamaraja, in due course of time, will take them away from the business of so-called research.
Heavy, huh?
We stop here?
Yeah, just 2 minutes more.
So this ends the teachings of Yamaraj. So we have different, this is the nature of Bhagavatam. Shukadeva Goswami is instructing Maharaj Parikshit, and then is telling a story of Narada Muni instructing Yudhishthira, and telling a story of Hiranyakashipu instructing his relatives, and telling a story of Yamaraja instructing the widows of Suyajna, the king Suyajna. And Yamaraja also uses the story of the foolish bird who was so bereaved, so affected by the capture of his wife that he didn't realize that actually he was also target of the hunter. So the hunter fixed his arrow and killed also the kulinga bird. So all his lamentation, this and that, was useless because actually he was also completely vulnerable to death. So yes, I remember one circumstance. It was a devotee in Vrindavan, Italian devotee, intelligent, young. Somehow he died in Vrindavan, and he was young and was very promising devotee. Maybe I'll be 25, 27. And he was a promising leader, educated, intelligent. So the day he died, I remember I was walking on the roof of the Vrindavan guest house. I was thinking, what should I learn about this situation? So at that time, my eye fell on a piece of paper, a scrap of paper, and this on this paper there was this verse, which I learned by heart. Ahanyani bhutani gachanti yamalaya shesha stavaram ichanti kimascharya mataparam. Yudhishthira Maharaj, who is actually the son of Yamaraj, saying, and he was interrogated by Yamaraj in the form of a yaksha, so there's a lot of Yamaraj. He was saying that, everybody sees people dying, but Shesha, those who remain, temporarily remain, they survive, they think, Stavaram, Ichanti, they desire stability, they desire steadiness, they desire permanency. And what could be more amazing and Ascharyan, fantastic, more fantastic and most bewildering and amazing in this. So with these sobering thoughts, we close today the Bhagavatam for the independently thoughtful. Thank you for participating. Thank you.
We should think independently to prepare for our death.
True. So thank you very much for your participation, those who are online, especially those who may see this as recorded. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.